So today we have four panelists who are joining us. First, we have Laura Crespo, who is the NAF Clinical Research Coordinator for the CRC-SCA Natural History Study. That means she helps run the logistics on the entire study across North America. We also have Chelsea Chen, who is a Clinical Research Coordinator for the University of California, San Francisco study site of the CRC-SCA Natural History Study. And then we have two CRC-SCA participants with us today, Tyler Maxwell, who has been part of the study for about 10 years, and Cindy Ritz, who has been part of the study for about 5 years at this point. So before we jump into the panel, we're going to start off with an overview of the CRC-SCA, a bit of a history, where it started, where it's going. So Laura, I will turn the floor over to you for this overview.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Celeste. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. So my name is Laura Crespo. I am NAF's Clinical Research Coordinator for the study. And as you all probably already know, NAF is a nonprofit organization kind of established to help persons with ataxia and their families. So we work very closely with the world's leading ataxia investigators, funding research and partnering with pharmaceutical companies in the search for treatments and a cure. So the project that I am currently lead coordinator on is the Clinical Research Consortium for the Study of Cerebellar Ataxias, or CRC-SCA for short. And I'll definitely be shortening that because it is a little bit of a mouthful. And the CRC-SCA is a study that we kind of call a natural history study. And so for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a brief background and overview of what I think is this incredible research study. So let's start off with just kind of wondering, what is a natural history study? What do I mean when I say that? So a natural history study collects data that shows how a specific disease progresses in individuals over time. It is different from a clinical trial because we don't give medications as part of a natural history study, or we don't really attempt other interventional methods. Our natural history study is really just observational, so we can track how a disease progresses naturally in an individual. And we do this through physical and neurological exams, clinical assessments by your doctors, and self-report questionnaires by you. And they're all repeated many, many times over. So that way we can see how your results or answers are kind of changing over time. All right, so why should we even collect this type of research data? Collecting this data is essential for developing clinical trial design that's eventually going to lead to facilitating drug development. And so eventually that hopefully will lead to a cure, and that is our ultimate goal. It also, in our case, will help us better understand the natural history of SCAs or spinocerebellar ataxias and factors that can kind of affect them. And that latter part, unfortunately, is still not well understood in SCA. So again, that's why we're collecting this data. A natural history study can also help us define the disease in geographical distinct areas. And finally, it also allows us to continue working towards developing additional clinical measures or outcome measures that are sensitive and reliable in ataxias. Okay, so kind of our motto for the CRC-SCA and NAF is we're here to kind of help accelerate the development of treatments and find a cure while working to improve the lives of those living with ataxia. Okay, so just a brief history of the CRC-SCA. It's a lot on here, so I'll kind of go through it briefly. So the original idea for this particular natural history study developed in the 1990s when a group of clinical researchers got together. And their goal was to kind of just improve the treatment of ataxia, design a big database, and create an ataxia patient registry. So it goes back a couple of decades. Fast forward to about 2009, 2011. This is when the research really starts to pick up. We're getting a lot of grants. We have about 347 patients in the study at around that time. And that was the first inclusion of SCA 1, 2, 3, and 6. And we had about 8 research sites. Continuing on to about 2012 to 2013, and then 2016 to 2021, So we end up growing up to about 730 patients by 2021. SCA 7, 8, and 10 joined the study. We have a lot of funding coming from different private donors, and NAF is really backing the research. We grow to about 14 research sites by about 2021. 2022, 790 patients. NAF, again, continuing to fund, kind of joins hands with a couple of drug development companies to develop what we call the DDC, or the Drug Development Collaborative. Again, just to continue making sure that this research study, the CRC-SCA, is continuing. And with that additional funding, we're able to get up to 15 research sites. And then kind of bringing it closer to now. So in 2023, we jump up to 963 patients. Again, NAF and the DDC are kind of backing everything, and we're up to 16 research sites. And as it stands today, these are all the current research sites that we are hosting Natural History Study at. So it's really amazing to kind of see how much the study has grown, how many sites have kind of joined the study to continue facilitating the research. So we have everything from the East Coast, so Columbia University in New York, Emory in Atlanta, all the way to the West Coast, UCLA, UCSF, and everything in between. Okay, so what does it kind of look like today in 2024? So we are rapidly continuing to grow in participation. We have a total of 987 patients enrolled to date. Our 2024 goal, sort of our milestone, is to enroll 104 new patients just this year. And I'm very happy to report that we're definitely on track for that. We've achieved about 18% of that goal so far for this year across all 16 sites. We're also hoping to do increase our return visit milestones. So far across the history of the study, we have done about 1,900 return visits, which means that participants had their visit one, or like their baseline visit, and then they returned for at least a second, third, or fourth visit after about 1,900 or so times so far. So we have a goal for this as well. So our goal for this year is to complete 292 return visits with our participants. And again, we've achieved about 19% of that goal so far, which is really great to see. So of course, with more participants, we're able to collect more research data, which is helping us to kind of continue evolving our own study to address new research questions. So 2024 has some really exciting additions for the study. We're most proud, in my opinion, to report that we are adding 2 new ataxia types. So we're looking to invite Canvas or RFC1 patients, as well as SCA 27B patients to the study this year. We're also adding a really cool new sub-study. So under sort of like the framework of the CRC-SCA, we're having an MRI sub-study that's going to be open to select patients. And then, of course, more sub-studies are in the works. So even more opportunities for people to participate in the research. Just wanted to give you some faces here. So these are our lead principal investigators, and then as well as our lead coordinators, our study coordinators at some of the sites. So if you do participate at some of these sites, so either Columbia, UT Southwest, or Johns Hopkins, UCLA, you might see some of these familiar faces there. And then some of our study external partners that we also like to collaborate on when we do receive data from patients. We have the HII, we have BioSend at Indiana University, and the University of Chicago that we're also partnering with data. All right, and so obviously with a lot of data and a lot of participants coming in, you might be wondering, okay, well, what are we kind of doing with all of that research data that we're collecting? So we have learned a lot over the years, and just to kind of show you some of the papers that are going on, kind of quietly, the research analysis that's going on in the background. So our investigators have looked at how fatigue impacts quality of life in people with spinocerebellar ataxias. We've had papers come out about the impact of ethnicity on the clinical presentations of SCA3. We've also seen how repeat expansions can affect genetic modifiers for depression, as well as dysphagia in spinocerebellar ataxias. And then most recently, a paper coming out about the cerebellar cognitive affect, or Schmann's syndrome scale, so looking at cognitive effects and different ataxias. So lots of research analysis going on in the background that sometimes I feel like participants don't always know about. But just want to let you know that we are doing so much with anything that our participants give us in terms of data. Just a little quiet in the background. Okay, so just talked a lot about kind of the history and what we're doing with the data. But hopefully, as I've been describing the study, you've sort of been thinking to yourself, well, you know, how can I participate? This sounds really interesting. Who's eligible to kind of be in the study? So I'm gonna kind of turn it over to that now and discuss how you might be eligible. So currently in the CRC-SCA, we are recruiting SCAs 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 10, 27B, and RFC1. Eligible participants must fit into one of the following categories, one or more. So you must be age 6 or older with symptoms or signs of ataxia with a genetic confirmation of one of the above SCAs in yourself or a first-degree family member. Or you are an individual 18 or older with a genetic confirmation of one of the SCAs I just listed. Or you are a former undiagnosed Ready Scott participant. So these are the different ways that you might be eligible for our study. If you're providing cerebrospinal fluid, you would be 18 or older. And of course, you are excited and willing to participate in the study, and you have the ability to give consent for being inside the study. Okay, so what happens at a natural history study visit? So it's a lot, and you know, each site will have their own kind of flow of activities at an actual visit. But here's what a typical visit might look like. So let's say you arrive at the clinic at around 10 a.m. You complete some patient-facing assessments or so for about 30 minutes. Then you might move on to some patient assessments with your doctor or the neurologist there. You might complete some what we call active assessments. And you would complete some more physician assessments. So I think actually the first one would have been you talk with the coordinator and you answer some of their questions. A lot of questions that get asked in the beginning. And then if you are willing, we do ask our participants to donate some blood samples. So the next portion of that would be any sort of like biosample donation. If you agree, there's an optional spinocerebellar fluid donation, but that's optional for everybody. And some of the places that we send these blood donations is to one of our partners, which is the BioSend repository, or University of Chicago, where we send some whole blood to just confirm that you have ataxia, one of the ataxias that we're looking for. And then any of the questionnaires gets sent to our database. And so that's where we hold all of the clinical data. So yeah, so this is what might be happening at one of your natural history study visits. Okay, so a couple slides left and I'm almost done. So for study participation, you might be wondering, well, how many visits and how often do I even have to be there? So we are collecting what we call longitudinal data, which just means that we ask participants to attend regular visits and repeat the same assessments for as long as you are interested and comfortable coming back and continue participating in the study. We do strongly encourage enrolled patients to commit to about an annual visit. Can you leave the study? Of course, this is completely voluntary. Just because you sign a consent form doesn't mean that you have to stay in the study. You could even switch to different study sites if you'd prefer, or skip an annual visit. But of course, like I've been mentioning, the data that we're gathering is super important. So we do hope that participants can commit to about 3 to 5 years of study visits. And the most important part that everybody probably wonders about is there compensation for participating? Yes, of course. There is a monetary stipend received at every visit that you attend. And there's actually an additional stipend if you choose to participate in some more optional activities like cerebrospinal fluid donation. Okay, so I believe this is my last slide here. So how can you get involved? Hopefully everything that I've said so far is enticing and you're thinking, wow, like I really want to join the study as soon as possible. So you could visit NIF's CRC-SCA webpage, which is listed right here, to learn more about the natural history study. If you scroll down on the page, you'll find a screening tool to just help you determine if you are eligible to participate. You would scroll down a little bit more, and you can find this. If you find like this, these links here, you would scroll to this particular link to find more information for patients and families. And if you are interested or just have more questions, you can contact the research coordinator at your nearest study site. And this link down here kind of brings up a map of all the study sites, which might be a little bit more helpful to visualize. But those 16 sites, like I said, we have them all over the country and one in Canada. So there should be a fairly close site to you so that you could reach out to that coordinator, ask them, hey, you know, I have some questions. I would love to participate, but can you just answer my questions first? And that's totally fine. All right, so that is all. Hopefully all that info was very helpful for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. We're going to transition into the panel now. So I'll ask that Tyler, Chelsea, and Cindy come back on camera. Wonderful. So we just heard a little bit about the background of the CRC-SCA, some of the technical details. Let's go dive right into questions. So for the first question, we have for Cindy and Tyler. Both of you have been participants in the CRCA-SCA Natural History Study for a number of years. So why did you decide to participate in this natural history study? Tyler, how about we start with you and then we'll go to Cindy.
Sure, absolutely. So I was diagnosed with ataxia about 15 years ago at a pretty young age. And my dad was actually the first one that got involved in the study because he was trying to find ways. He was symptomatic at that point. And so as soon as I turned 18, I decided that it sounded like a good idea. And I really didn't have many symptoms of ataxia at that point, but I wanted to really get involved. The thing that really intrigues me about the study was that I liked going in and having an ataxia doctor, even if it was just for the study purposes, someone that really specialized in the field and could really give me up-to-date information. You know, when I go to my primary care provider and I tell them that I have ataxia, they have to do some quick Googling themselves to figure out exactly what it is that I have. So it's really nice to be able to talk to somebody on like an annual basis or so that can give me that up-to-date information, let me know what studies have been done, and really just talk to me about my disease state.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Tyler. And Cindy, why did you get involved with the natural history study?
Actually, I did not even have a clue about what it was, but I think it was Dr. Shakatai who was just telling me about it. And I thought, well, heck, why not? And it's, you know, it's about an hour's drive from where I live, and it's once a year. And you get more acquainted with all the staff there at UT Southwestern, and it just seemed like a good fit. So I volunteered to do it. And then I thought, well, crud, this isn't anything. And I continue to come back. So.
Well, thank you. And now we're going to switch over to Chelsea. You are a site coordinator as part of the CRC-SCA. Could you tell us a little bit about what, or please describe your job as a study coordinator, and what do you do to help make the study run?
Yeah, absolutely. So people usually hear about our study in lots of different ways. I think the most common way people do hear about our study is through clinicaltrials.gov. Maybe folks are just, you know, newly diagnosed. They don't really know what to do. So they go on the internet, do some research, and then they kind of find that, you know, UCSF might be the most convenient location for them to participate. And so they reach out to us. And then what I actually like to do is first introduce myself over email, and then I actually like to first schedule a phone call to talk about the study, because I think as a coordinator, like it's easy to be like, oh, well, like this makes a lot of sense. The study's, you know, like I know it so well, but for people who might not have participated in research before, they don't know what it looks like. So I like to schedule a phone call, and I actually send over a PDF version of our consent forms just so that they have in writing everything that we might ask them to do, what we would, you know, cover during the study. Sorry, my cat is being very involved. And so, of course, with the consent forms, we don't ask for signature or anything. That's just purely for review. Another way that people do get involved is through our clinic. Maybe they just got diagnosed in our clinic. I like to, see if I can pop on over to our clinic and actually talk to the patient face to face, and kind of do the same thing there. We talk about the study, what it would look like, and also ideally give them a copy of blank consent forms for review at home. And if all goes well, then I'll reach out via email and schedule a baseline visit in which we'll go over eligibility, sign those consent forms and get started with the study.
So just to clarify, what happens between that initial, you touched on this a little bit, but between that initial email and someone is in the clinic with their first visit, that baseline visit you were talking about, what
Yeah.
happens during that process? Can you walk us through again what sort of documentation needs to be signed? What kind of information is shared?
Yeah, in terms of like before for us at UCSF, before they sign any consent forms formally, there's nothing they really need to do on our end. Like we do encourage participants to review the consent form just so they have kind of like they've done their homework on what's expected. No surprises when we actually do have them sign the consent forms. Oftentimes, people will say like, can I get my family involved? And then I kind of do the same thing with family members. I try to schedule a phone call or meeting individually, just because everyone might have different expectations. I want us to be on the same page. But in terms of like, what they can do, I do encourage like, check out our clinicaltrials.gov site, our consent forms. And, if they have any questions, I can chat with them again, but we don't have any requirements until they actually sign any consent forms at that first baseline visit.
Well, it's good to know that if they do have any questions, they can reach out to you and clarify things before they get started.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want anyone like signing any paperwork, be like,
Yeah.
oh no, this is actually not what I wanted to sign up for. So
No, it's important. So let's talk about the actual visits themselves. We'll go back to Cindy and Tyler. How about we start with you, Cindy? Can you share
Okay.
with us what happens during a study visit? What is it like as a participant?
Well, it's pretty much like the slide that Laura was
Mhm.
showing earlier. Well, let me say first that I have been through 3 Chelseas in this study. The one little girl left, and the next guy that took over was just temporary. And the third lady, she's been with me for about 3 years now. So, but thinking back to the very first one with the first little Chelsea, she was very, very, very thorough, and I don't the other 2 coordinators they've not been as thorough as she was, but I think it's probably because she was new to the program. I'm not really sure. And but it was very easy. I mean, it was nothing challenging except for those first little questions where they ask you to name all of the words you can think of that begin with the letter F, and then
Yeah.
name a profession, and then a vegetable alternating. And after about 5 years, you would think they asked the same question. So you would think, I can study up on this. Yeah. But sure enough, when I get in there, it's like everything goes out the door, and I'm flower, fun, funeral,
Yeah.
So then after that, Dr. Shakatai came in and put you through the paces of the SARA exam. You have to flip your hands, and you have to who knows, follow the finger and run your heel from your knee to your toe, and all that stuff. And then they broke for lunch the first time, and then when we got back together, they did the blood work and maybe some more questions. The coordinator asked questions, just covering final pieces, I guess. But it's nothing hard. It's nothing challenging. It was fun to participate. You could ask questions along the way, and I don't know, I've just enjoyed it. So I've been back for all of my visits, and I will be happy to announce that of the 292 return visits y'all are trying to get this year, I'll be one of them. And my sister also, I got her involved in it. So she flies out from Atlanta once a year and she goes with me. So.
Well, thank you, Cindy. And you made some important points there as well. There's the physical exam, there's the different written ones, or they'll ask you all sorts of questions. Usually there's a break for lunch. So thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
And Tyler, what would you like to share about your experience? Because you have a bit of a unique experience. You have been a participant at 2 different study locations.
I have, yes. And so I first started out when I was a little bit younger, going to the Los Angeles site, and then I eventually moved to New York for my job, and so I was right next to the Columbia site, and so I ended up switching my site over to the Columbia site. And so what I can say is that the general process is very standardized between the 2 sites, and so it's really much of the same information. And it's funny that Cindy mentioned like all the F words that you have to come up with in a row and things like that, because I struggle with that every single year. And I think the same thing after every time, like I should really just commit this memory so that I can prepare for it the next time. But it gets me every year. And so there's a lot of assessments like that go in. Even actually before the site is set up, I will say my coordinator at my site does a really great job of working with me. So in contrast to maybe Cindy's experience, my visits actually tend to be all in one sitting, and so we don't often break for lunch. They usually work with me, and then I just go into the site usually around 3 p.m. Because that usually works better with my workday. And we do it all at once, and so it takes me like maybe 2 hours, and I just finish the whole thing all at one time, so I don't end up having to break or anything like that. I don't have to take a full day off work because I live close enough to the site that it works out. Um, then once we get there, it's much the same as Cindy had described in her recollection as well. So I get there, we do the physical assessments, we have the written assessments that we talked about, all the different words that you have to jumble through. And then there are some there's walking assessments. So you walk, heel to toe in a straight line. They watch your gait and whether you're swaying from side to side. And then there's the assessments like Cindy mentioned too, like where you take your heel from your knee and you move it down your shin. And so the fun part I will say about a lot of that I have noticed in doing this for multiple years is that have now gotten to a point that I can talk to my doctor or whoever's doing the assessment, and they can look at my scores from the previous years and tell you, this is an area that you seemingly have gotten worse in, or you seem to have gotten a lot better in your ataxia, and maybe you're compensating if you're feeling it a little bit worse. But it's fun to be able to look at it just more objectively, I guess, from the physician's standpoint, and be able to see, how am I actually performing? Because on a year-to-year basis, I truly feel like my ataxia symptoms are getting worse. And so it's really fun to be able to see, like, how do I compare on an annual basis? But the actual site visit is really not too difficult. Like I said, it's usually like a 2-hour period that I go in and get everything done at one stay. All the physical assessments, all the word forms, and the blood draws as well. I usually just get them done really quickly so I can get there pretty fast.
And that's a really good point too, because the same study is happening at all the sites. There's the same procedures, but some sites may do them in a slightly different order. Some may break for lunch. Some may do them all at once. They may be scheduled at different times of day, depending on if you're retired or if you're working or any sort of number of factors. So thank you so much for sharing, Tyler.
No problem.
And we'll go back to Chelsea for this next question. So we've talked a little bit about what happens at a site visit. But what happens afterwards? What kind of communications do participants receive from the research coordinator after their first appointment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think during the visit, especially if it's somebody's first time coming in, there will be a lot of questions about like, oh, I heard about like this, potential supplement or something like, could that help with ataxia? And like, so these are questions that are kind of not really, of course, studied in the CRC-SCA study, but we do want to address them, even if they're more kind of like a clinic question. And so what I will do is I'll kind of circle back to Dr. Geschwind, who I work with, and I'll make sure I get any questions the participant may have answered, and then I'll follow up in that email. Another important thing that we do is very bureaucratic, but I do like to send everyone a signed copy of those consent forms. Any consent forms that we have signed by participants, we do send. And a lot of the times, like, we have patients who have been coming in for many, many years and they're like, I don't even want this. But, I'm just going to say, like, you can have it, you can ignore it, but I'm just going to do it so that, in case it does come up, you'll have it. And then other things.
Maybe as a follow-up question, because we talked about follow-up visits and people having annual check-ins. Do people need to remember that date and contact the site, or are they contacted like as a reminder
Gotcha, yeah.
that the visit's coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do on our end is we have a little tracker, and with the CRC-SCA study, we try to get people to come in, in a roughly, like, it's a 3-month window, which I'll explain in a minute. So let's say, like, today you come in and have your baseline visit. So the 3-month window would be kind of like either it could be as far back as January or as far forward as July next year. So really, I think I try and reach out really like 6 months before. So like if we're in April, I'll try to reach out in like October. And I'll see, like, people have trips planned, or, life happens. So I just try to reach out early and say, like, hey, do you have like a particular month you're interested in coming in? And then I really, really want to try to work with people on when they can come in. If they can come in late, that also can work. So we just do our best, I think. But they kind of give me like a month, and then I'll go in and say, like, okay, here are the specific dates and times we have available, if any of those work for you. And if you need to reschedule, totally fine. And we do have like an online portal for patients to fill out questionnaires. So sometimes people, like to do things ahead of time at home. So, or, maybe you're the kind of person who wants to just go in and get it all done in person at once. So, we really try to work with what works best for you. And scheduling wise, we try and be flexible as well. But
It's good to
certainly
know
we
there's that
reach out
flexibility.
and we keep track on our end. So we certainly don't expect like, oh my gosh, I haven't like talked to Chelsea this year yet. Like it's okay.
Well, it's very good to know that there's that flexibility there, because I know I'm the kind of person that I would completely forget if things were not in my calendar or if people weren't reaching out to me. So thank you, Chelsea. And we'll go back for our last planned question to Cindy and Tyler, and we'll start again with Cindy. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced participating in the natural history study?
There really has not been a challenge for me. And I don't know why that is, but I live about an hour from UT Southwestern. The challenge, I think, would be for my sister. We fly her from Atlanta out here because she wanted to be part of she knew she could do it at Emory, but she wanted to be part of, because Dr. Shakatai is such a good guy. She wanted to come out here and experience exactly what I had told her about. So this will be her 4th year, I think. And that's a challenge for her because she's got to get the flight and get out here. But then Jan, the coordinator, is really good about getting us together the same day. And then I can sit around and watch Julie, or she can sit around and watch me. We can make faces at each other, roll our eyes, whatever we want to do. So scheduling has not been an issue at all until this year. And 3 times we had to change the appointment. And the third time I said, why don't we just wait till my sister comes in and, we'll do it at the same time. And they said, yeah, that's okay. That's fine. So exactly like Chelsea said, they'll do anything to make it easier for you, if they can. So, it really, I hate to say it, but it's just been smooth sailing, and it's been fun, so I don't really have any challenges.
I have heard some stories from other folks, though, like you're mentioning of having to change appointments a couple times, trying to work things out, but the site coordinators doing the best they can to try to accommodate things.
Yeah.
And then, Tyler, what kind of challenges have you experienced being a participant for close to a decade?
Yeah, so I will say that I have had some difficulties at different times. So when I first started the study, I actually was in my undergraduate education in Colorado. And so if we recall back to that slide that had all the study sites, there's no site within Colorado. And so that was very difficult for me to get to the study site in LA. Granted, I had some family in LA, so I had a place to stay, and that made it a little bit easier. But it was still a little bit difficult getting that flight and being able to coordinate the appointment time, and then it wasn't at that point just a day out of my schedule to go back to California. It was a whole weekend at least to be able to make that travel. And even when my dad started the study, we lived 7 hours away from the LA site. And we actually live closer to the San Francisco site where Chelsea's at. But I don't know that, I don't know why we chose to go to the LA site. But that it was still a long drive, and so we had to make a full weekend out of it every time we wanted to go for those appointments. So sometimes that travel could make things a little difficult. I know when I was in school, I didn't make every annual appointment that I wanted to, just because if I had exams or something going on, then I wouldn't be able to make those arrangements to be able to make it out to LA. I did the best I could, but it wasn't always possible. And so I think that was one of the harder things about starting the study, in a different location. Then once I've moved to New York, scheduling has been much easier because I live so close to the site. And so I really at this time don't see much of any problems that I've had with getting the site. One thing that I started doing since being in the New York site though is scheduling. You mentioned the CSF collection, and so I've been scheduling the lumbar puncture for a CSF collection. I do recall when I was back at the LA site that was a little bit difficult as well because I think that I don't recall exactly, but I think that they needed us to go to New York for a lumbar puncture, although I'm not entirely sure. And so there was, again, some scheduling things that would made it a little difficult to do every part of the study. And again, although that lumbar puncture is completely optional, but just the scheduling can be a little difficult here and there. Other than that, though, I don't think that there really has been any difficulty in going to the site visits.
I have a question for Tyler. Since your dad was in this study, did y'all ever get to go in California at the same time and sit in on each other's study?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. And so when we first started the study, and so it's my dad has the ataxia as well, and then me, my brother, and sister all have ataxia too. So all of us have gone to appointments together, and so it's been very nice. We can go at the same time. We can schedule our visits at the same time. That way, we can all group together in LA, get one hotel if we need to, and not have to, spend a bunch of extra money. And so that part and the coordination from the coordinator at the site has been extremely helpful in helping us, make sure that we can all go at the same time and really hit like 4 birds with one stone.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like going for group appointments, if you have multiple people in your family going at the same time, sounds like it's a little bit more fun and you have more support.
Yes.
Well, that is all the questions we had planned. So we're going to turn it over to our open question period. As a reminder, if you do have a question for any of our panelists, you can drop it in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to be going through and reading them out. And if you have a question for a specific panelist, just please include their name in it, or I'll ask it to the entire panel. But we already have a few questions that have been submitted. Before we jump into those, we've had a few people ask about participation in Canada. And I am pleased to let you know that we're going to have a Canada-specific panel for participating in the CRC-SCA sometime in June. We're still working out the details, just because some of the logistic things work a little bit different up north. But please stay tuned and join us again at that panel. We'll have some more details for you. But let's jump into questions. So the first one was partially answered a bit earlier, but why is it that people need to have a genetic diagnosis of certain types of ataxia in order to participate in this study? I'll turn this maybe to Chelsea and Laura if you would like to answer.
I can take kind of the first stab at that. So why do you have to have a genetic confirmation of a certain? So right now, if I'm understanding correctly, so we wish that we could include everybody in the study, you know, anybody with any type of ataxia. But right now we're kind of focused on these few, just because I think the researchers really just want to have a clear direction with certain ataxias that they are most familiar with. So right now, yes, we are only inviting people with those, I forget how many, like 10 or so ataxias. And so we want to make sure that when anybody joins the study, you have the ataxia that we think you have, and to make sure that we're collecting accurate data. So if, for instance, you have a different type of ataxia, and then we start doing all these tasks with you, all these tests, but we're not really picking up on answers that we thought we would, that could impact the research a little bit and kind of impact there's a word here that I'm looking for, but yeah, we want to make sure that we're answering the questions that we want to. So that's why we do ask for a genetic confirmation. You don't have to come in with a genetic confirmation yourself if you have one in a relative and you have signs or symptoms. We do genetic confirmation just to make sure in our study. So Chelsea, if you have any more to add to that.
Yeah, I think you basically nailed most of it, but I think what I would say also is that if you do come to me with and say, like, you know, I have like a type of ataxia that's not covered by the study, what can I do? I will say, like, you know, it's definitely a possibility for that type of ataxia to be added in the future. There's just so many types that we're also trying to keep up with the available amount of literature and make sure that we're prepared to actually study something. So for example, with like SCA 27B, like that was just diagnosed, or the diagnosis was just identified so recently. And so we're still trying to keep up with, like, okay, how do we like work with patients who have this? And how do we recognize this clinically? And I would say also, I think like there's so many different types of ataxias that aren't just the SCAs as well. So I think if people are confused, I just encourage them to reach out to me and we'll figure it out from there. But yeah, in terms of the study participation, unfortunately, it is just limited for those reasons.
I will jump in and add, we have a number of folks who have expressed an interest in participating in research, and unfortunately, they're not eligible to participate in this particular study. One of the things that the National Ataxia Foundation does is try to promote all forms of ataxia research. So if you're not eligible for this natural history study, we do have a list of, on our webpage, participate in ataxia research, all different forms of research, both natural history studies like this one, interventional studies where you have some kind of treatment that's being tested out, or more research studies where you're trying to understand the fundamentals of ataxia. And we have more options available there if you'd like to check that out. All right, jumping down to the next question, which is for Cindy and Tyler. We have an attendee who's, if you feel comfortable doing so, sharing a little bit more about your experience with ataxia. What form of ataxia do you have?
Can start off. So I was diagnosed with SCA3 about 10 years ago, long before I had symptoms of ataxia, just because it's the genetic ataxia. So when my dad had it, I got tested and immediately found out I had it. Ataxia for me has been crazy for sure. And so I started developing symptoms probably in my early 20s. And then I noticed pretty quickly after that that they started getting much worse. Not super severe yet, although of course it does get worse with age for the type of cerebral ataxia that I have. It has been really rewarding being a part of this study, though. And I wanted to add something actually to a question Celeste just added as well about additional research. One of the best things about being a part of this study is that, again, because I live so close, but my research coordinator reaches out to me frequently with new studies that are being done. She says, "Hey, I see that you would qualify for this study. Are you interested in coming in?" And so being a part of this study really has opened the door for me to allow me to give back to the Ataxia Foundation in many other ways and be a part of more than one study. So I actually am frequently in her office, probably about once a month or once every 2 months, just because there are a number of studies that she, you know, they may not be specific to SCA3 or anything, but it's great to be able to give back in that way. And so I think I've had a really good time in that regard.
I have SCA2, and the history of my family goes way back, kind of like Tyler. My father had it, his father before him had it, my brother and my sister both have it, but we're experiencing different symptoms, and I don't know why that is. We all have repeats that go anywhere from 36 to 38, 39, I think, is the most. I have basic trouble with balance. I mean, I am a walker full time now. But balance and coordination. I don't have any eye problems or speech problems. Well, you might think I have speech problems, but I haven't been told that I have speech problems yet. But my brother he's 2 years older than me, and he's in a wheelchair now full time. And then my sister, who is 4 years younger than me, she's almost asymptomatic, but like Tyler, she got tested when the rest of us did, and they just I guess we just needed to know what was coming in the future, but that's kind of hard to predict because, like I said, with the three of us are within 6 years of each other, and each one is different. So, and we're trying to get a handle on it, but I don't think we ever will. And then my father, when he died, he was in a nursing home, and so he was really bad off, but he was like 82 when he died. So, and he aspirated. He actually had those problems with the swallowing. So, for me, it's not that bad. You'll hear people at work or people at church, they'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you have this affliction." And I go, "Hey, it's nothing, compared to my father and my brother, I'm doing pretty good." So, other than the fact that it's all within our family and that we had never heard of this before, as a matter of fact, when Daddy first got tested, they were calling it OPCA back then, and I think that stood for olivocerebral
Yeah,
or
it's completely
so-
changed the diagnosis.
it was completely changed now. So here we are all thinking, oh, we've got OPCA, and then 15 years down the road they change it to SCA2.
But that's a really good point you made, though, because back then, when that diagnosis was being made, we didn't know that SCA2 was
Right.
a separate condition. Because of the research that's been made, we've been able to better understand this particular disorder, and studies like this one are hopefully will give us some answers as to why it sounds like you and your two siblings have very different symptoms, even though you have the
Yeah,
same condition. We're hoping to look for answers for that.
exactly. Yeah. So that's it.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing. We'll go to the next question. We have a question, I believe this is for Laura or Chelsea. We have an attendee who is a snowbird, So she lives in Columbus, Ohio, but during the winter she is in Tampa. And she's wondering, what site should she participate at? Is there rules for what site you should sign up for? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. So she's in Tampa. There's two options. There's the University of South Florida or the University of Florida that's available to you. There's really no it doesn't matter which one you would go to, as long as whatever kind of works best for you. And of course, your schedule, if maybe one site has an earlier opening for you, things like that. But that's certainly something that you can chat with the coordinators at each site with. And you can let them know that you are there snowbirding temporarily, and just just chat with them, and they will work with you, as kind of Chelsea has mentioned, and Tyler and Cindy, that they will definitely work with you to see what is the best option. But yeah, you're definitely, you have options, which is good.
Fantastic. And we'll go on to the next question. So someone is interested in learning more about what kinds of tests are done on the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid. Laura, could you tell us a little bit about what's done with that?
Yeah, that one I'm not too sure as much, but it is optional for everybody. So maybe Chelsea might have a little bit more of insight here, or maybe not.
Or here, I can jump in if it's helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah. So the goal of CSF, that draw, as well as blood draws and things like that, is to try to identify what we call a biomarker. So a good example of a biomarker for another condition is blood sugar levels for folks who have diabetes. For people who have diabetes, they can monitor their blood sugar, and that gives them an advanced heads up if symptoms are going to get worse. And if they do have a spike in their blood sugar, then they have a drug that they can, insulin, that they can treat ahead of time, so that they can help monitor their own symptoms. So we don't currently have a drug for most kinds of ataxia at the moment, but when we do down the line, we want to have a good sense of when would be the best time for people to take that drug, to administer it. And in order to do that, we're trying to find biomarkers for ataxia. So just like how blood sugar levels can give people who are diabetics a heads up of when symptoms are going to get worse, we want to find the same thing for people with ataxia. When are people's ataxia symptoms going to get worse? So we're looking for that in the blood, we're looking for that in the spinal fluid, and there's research being done on these samples and trying to correlate it with the in-person symptoms that people are documenting in the visits to try to figure that out and see what's available. Did I get that right, Chelsea?
Yeah, pretty much. I just have like a small thing to add.
Of
So I
course.
don't know what the study itself actually does with the CSF yet, and I think that's kind of up in the air for reasons that you and Laura covered already. But I think that like from the site end, we actually do kind of have a clinical analysis of the first 2 milliliters of CSF that we collect. So we actually check for kind of like red blood cells, white blood cells, protein, glucose levels. And this is sort of like to monitor the quality of the lumbar puncture, but as well as like if we see any abnormalities, we do want to alert the patient of those. So this isn't necessarily something that the study is asking for, but it's something that's protocol here at UCSF. And I'm sure, probably most, if not all, other study sites do as well. But we just take a small sample of those first 2 mils of CSF that are collected and check for anything there.
And we have a follow-up question about CSF draws for you, Chelsea. So there's an attendee here who asks if they've had a lumbar puncture in the past. Can that fluid somehow be shared with the study site, or do they need to have a fresh draw each time they want to participate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, we do need the participant to have a fresh draw. At the time of the LPs that are done for the CRC-SCA study, the CSF that's collected is actually processed in a very special way. So our study has its own protocol, and we actually ship off the samples to our central lab over at BioSend in Indiana, where they're kind of stored away indefinitely. Not really sure how that works, but they're stored away and kind of basically designated for ataxia specific research. But if you get a lumbar puncture anywhere else, they usually don't hang on to those CSF samples, and they certainly aren't affiliated with our study. So they're probably just looking at whatever tests were ordered, and then they kind of toss the sample. So unfortunately, those don't carry over.
Now, I have a question for Chelsea and Tyler. What is involved in getting that draw?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe Tyler, you can start us off.
Yeah, I can speak from the patient perspective. I work in a hospital, so I've seen lumbar punctures done many times, and I have to say that I was terrified the first time I did it. I've seen that needle before, but realistically, I did not feel a thing. And so at the New York site, they have nurses that are specialized. They do lumbar punctures all day long. And so they, they numb you so that I couldn't, it was a needle so small I couldn't even feel it. And then with the numbing agent, then I couldn't feel the larger needle go in at all. All they do is they put, I'm assuming, I guess, put the needle into my spine. They extracted some cerebral spinal fluid. But again, the whole process, I know it seems terrifying, and especially because it's such a sensitive area. Anybody would, kind of cringe when they're thinking about something going between the vertebrae, but it really was painless. It was more anxiety on my part because I had never done one before. But the whole process itself was very, very easy.
Okay. Yeah, because I've not done that. I've chosen not to do that, but I really didn't know if, what was involved. Thank you.
No, it's a really great question. I think I've heard from a lot of folks similar to Tyler about that anxiety of what is this going to be like? I don't know. But thank you both for sharing. And we have time for one last question before we end up today. We have an attendee who has SCA6 and they've had genetic testing done and they have a copy of that. But if they participate in this study, do they have to get retested? Or is that prior testing document sufficient? Chelsea, Laura, could you maybe elaborate on this?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So it definitely is really helpful if you come in with a genetic test because that really does kind of for us confirm that you're in a study that is where you're supposed to be. It's not for some other condition. It does sound very silly, but we do collect 1 tube of blood, ideally at your baseline visit for genetic confirmation, regardless of whether or not you do come in with that paperwork. And so this is a tube of blood that's sent off to the University of Chicago. And as a coordinator, we kind of tell them what to test for. So for example, if somebody came in and we don't know what type of SCA they have, then we could say like do a full panel. But for like this specific scenario, like we already know that this person has SCA6. So we would say, okay, like SCA6 was the, previous genetic confirmation. And so they would test it and come back to us and say like, okay, yeah, this person is like good to go in the study. And I know like I get a lot of questions about this, so thank you for bringing that up, but it is something that we do just to kind of like cross all our T's and dot our I's.
Just double check. That makes sense. And we are at time. So first off, I just wanted to extend a huge thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their time with us today. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences and chatting with us about this natural history study. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to all of you who were watching today, I hope you found out something new about the CRC-SCA Natural History Study. I hope this was helpful. And wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, folks.